Hey guys, it's your girl Heidi Lew. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode of the planks workout at Griffith Observatory. If you missed it, don't worry. I'll put a link to it at the end of this episode. This week, we aren't doing any exercises, but we will be talking about something you should be doing before you exercise. Or maybe you shouldn't be doing. Stay tuned, we'll get right into it. Today, we're going to be discussing stretching. Now, we are told to stretch before we exercise or before athletic events. But what if I told you stretching could reduce your strength and power? Would you do it? Well, let's break this down a little bit. When I say the word stretching to you, what do you think of? I'm sure you think of things you did in gym class when you were a kid, like reaching for your toes, stretching your hamstrings, stretching your quads. But there are many different types of stretching. Those that I listed are called static stretches. And static stretches are when you take your body, your muscle, to a point of tension where you feel it and you hold it for a minimum of 30 seconds. But there are other forms of stretching. Something called active isolated stretching is the process of using agonists and synergists to dynamically move the joint into a range of motion. And those stretches are stretches that you actually do probably on a regular basis as well, which is also stretching your quads, your adductors, your pecs. But in this case, you do the stretches for short periods of time. So 1 to 2 seconds, and you do maybe 5 to 10 reps of each of the stretches. And there is dynamic stretching. Dynamic stretching uses the force production of a muscle and the body's momentum to take a joint through the full available range of motion. You often see dynamic stretching before running events, such as hip swings to loosen up your hips. But dynamic stretching can also be used as an exercise in and of itself, such as walking lunges, squats, and the lift and chop motion. Now that we know and understand the different forms of stretching, let's go back to the question at hand. Does stretching decrease strength and power? Let's start with static stretching. Static stretching's job is to elongate the muscle. That changes the length-tension relationship between the muscle, which means it changes the resting length and the tension the muscle can produce at that length. If it is changing the tension the muscle can produce at that particular length, that means it is changing the power and strength it can produce at that length. I'll give you an example. If you have a slinky, which is long and stretched and limber and loose, and you have a spring, which is shorter, tighter, more compact, and contains more tension, and you pull them both apart and you let them bounce back, the spring is going to bounce back with more force, more power, more speed because of the tension that is contained in that spring versus the tension contained in the long stretched out slinky. So this is if you were to enter a dunk contest and to do a static stretch where you reach for your toes and then you go to try to jump for the basket, you are actually having less power and less strength in those leg muscles than what you had before you actually did the stretch. So let's take a look at active isolated and dynamic stretching. Active isolated and dynamic stretching do not change the length-tension relationship the same way that static stretching does. In actuality, dynamic stretching is the best form of stretching you can do before explosive exercises, before explosive movement. The reasoning for that, dynamic stretching mimics the movements being performed for that particular event, which increases the neuromuscular activation for those muscles being used, which leads to an increase in power output. It also increases flexibility without drastically changing the length-tension relationship. static stretching does change that length tension relationship, and it changes strength and power, but it only changes it for 5 to 10 minutes after the stretch. So static stretching can be done if it is done long enough before the explosive event that you are performing or the explosive exercise that you are performing. Static stretching is also not a bad thing because it is ideal and most important if you feel tightness in a muscle. So if there is a muscle imbalance, say you have a tight calf muscle, you need to do a static stretch to take that length tension relationship to a point that is optimal, and it will not or will be less likely to cause an injury if it is stretched with a static stretch properly. So static stretching is not bad. It is actually really great, and it prevents injuries. But if we have to answer the question, does stretching decrease strength and power? The answer is yes and no. Static stretching, according to research, has been shown to reduce strength and power, but dynamic stretching does not, and that is the stretch you should be doing before events or exercises where you want to use maximum strength and power. I hope this helps everyone out. I love being on this fitness journey with you guys. I want you to remember to like, comment, share with your friends, but most of all, subscribe. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!